Hello book lovers, and welcome to the second part of my Magical Wizards bookshelf tour. I'll add a link to the first half of the tour if you're joining in later, but basically this is my lifetime collection of books about magical creatures and supernatural abilities, perfect for the homeschooled wizards still waiting on their Hogwarts invitation. Many of the books on these shelves are long out of print, but I'll be adding links to them below so you can enjoy hunting for any that take your fancy. Let's leap right into looking at the books. On this fourth shelf, I have a few pretty vintage decorated books, a witchy mouse and her mushroom house, and some Viking and British folklore collections. Gleanings from the Poets by Robert Inglis is a vintage collection of magical English poetry from Chaucer to Tennyson. This edition was published around 1880. The Fairy Queen and Her Knights by Alfred Church is a retelling of Spenser's Fairy Queen, with 8 coloured plates and a beautiful decorative binding, printed around 1910. Vaesen, Norse Gods and the Undead by Johan Egerkrans are a set of 3 stunning Viking mythology books. Oversized, strong linen bindings laid in illustration and debossed ink on the covers, along with sewn bindings and a ribbon bookmark, thick glossy pages. The books are standalones, but I'm sure you'll want all 3 once you've seen one in person. I have a separate video covering these books in depth, which I'll link to below. These 2 hefty folio society sets here feature the Folk Tales of Britain by Catherine Briggs. They're illustrated by Hannah and Peter Furman and Claire Malinsky. Catherine's life work was compiling a definitive collection of Britain's folk tales, from medieval manuscripts to oral transcripts, and it was finally published in 1971 when she was 73 years old. It's an amazing collection, and I'll cover it in more depth in a separate video, but for now I'll just take a quick tour of the bindings and some of the illustrations. The Narratives collection features more fantastical folk tales, while the Legends collection includes those stories that were once believed to be true. Each volume has a colour frontispiece and many internal black and white illustrations. The decorations on the shelf, if you'd like a quick closer look, include this very cute felted mouse and her little mushroom house. Onto the 5th shelf, we have a few potions bottles. The skull one's actually a vodka bottle, and a pretty Galileo thermometer, which unfortunately doesn't work anymore, but it's cute on the shelf. Fabulous Creatures and Other Magical Beasts by Joel Levy is a field guide to the denizens of the supernatural realm, from gnomes, fairies and elves to unicorns, dragons and minotaurs. It has more than 600 colour illustrations and maps. The Kalevala is a Finnish national epic poem that covers Finnish folklore and mythology. Beginning with the world's creation, it follows the story of Vinamanen, a shamanistic hero song and story, his young rival, Joukahainen, and the handsome but arrogant Lemminkainen. They quest for love, revenge, truth, and the mysterious Sampo, the ultimate source of prosperity. Forging Dragons by John Howe features an amazing collection of dragon art, created over the iconic fantasy artist's 30-year career. Howe explores the inspirations and techniques he uses to render these amazing beasts of myth and legend throughout the book. A Hobbit's Journal by Michael Green is a beautifully illustrated blank journal filled with gorgeous sketches of characters and scenes from The Hobbit. I actually also have a unicorn journal by the same artist that I filled with favourite inspirational quotes. Book of Little Folk by Lauren Mills is a beautifully illustrated collection of fairy tales retold and illustrated by Lauren. The collection includes both familiar and less well-known tales such as Fairy Bread, the Little Elf, Thumbelina, the Moss Green Princess and Vasilisa the Beautiful. Fabulous Places of Myth by Robert Ingpen brings to life Camelot, home of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Atlantis, long buried beneath the ocean, Valhalla, the final home of the great Norse warriors, and the Tower of Babel, birthplace of disputation and difference. The Leprechaun Companion is an inventive collection of leprechaun lore that also looks at the links between leprechauns and other fairy folk of Ireland, as well as their cousins in neighbouring countries. Brownies, boggarts, piskies, spriggans, kobolds and many more. It's delightfully illustrated, but I would have preferred a larger size to appreciate the art and read the writing. This little stack's a collection of real maps about fantastical places of literature, such as the Lord of the Rings, Redwall, Discworld. I've got a whole separate video about these and all the other books in my fantasy map collection, which looks at them in more detail if you're interested, which I'll link below. The Secret History series by Ari Burke retells natural histories, uncovers hidden worlds and shares magic and customs of various magical races, accompanied of course by delightful illustrations. As you can see here, there are volumes on giants, hobgoblins and mermaids, and they all feature movable ephemera details such as miniature books to read and fold out letters. The volumes you can see here with the pretty tassels are the British editions published by Templar. The one without is the American edition, which is published by Candlewick. The next stack includes a lot of oversized books that I have to lay flat to fit in the shelf. A Diversity of Dragons by Anne McCaffrey and Richard Woods is illustrated by John Howe. It's presented as a story of two friends sitting around the fireplace sharing tales of dragons from major fantasy authors. A few dozen summaries of favourite tales are shared, accompanied by Howe's soft and fluid magnificent dragon illustrations. Dragons covered range from the time of the Bible and the Babylonians, the Arthurian era, the Chinese dynasties, to the current dragons invented by Robin McKinley, Gordon R. Dixon, Melanie Rowan and McCaffrey herself. The Discovery of Dragons by Graham Base is a faux journal in which a Victorian scientist, R.W. Greasebeam, presents the original correspondence of early explorers who encountered some of the world's most fearsome dragons. This one is the later expanded edition. The first edition has a blue cover. In this gorgeous and enormous volume of Fairies Tales by Brian and Wendy Froud, we have Fairies Tales coupled with portraits and interspersed with drawings and studies of the mysterious and enchanting folk who travel back and forth between the human world and theirs. Having the artwork reproduced in such a large format is an amazing opportunity to see the incredible detail in each wonderful painting. Another lovely, simply huge volume, Trolls, features new and classic work by both Brian Froud and his wife Wendy, woven together with the artefacts and symbols of the natural world to create a fascinating revelation about the world of trolls. The book explores trolls and their culture, revealing philosophies, their home life, their world attitudes through tales and mythology and archaeology. Gorgeous illustrations as always, and photos of some delightfully crafted creatures. This gorgeous book is what you get when you cross two incredibly talented artists and their visions of fairyland. Fairies by Brian Froud and Alan Lee is an amazing collection of drawings and paintings that describe various kinds of elves and fairies found in myths, legends and literature. I have 2 copies of this book actually, because I'm just that obsessed. A beat-up first edition and the later anniversary edition in hardback. As you're about to realise, I have quite a collection of Froud books, because there are more to follow. At least the good news is that many of these are still in print. This one here is The Runes of Elfland by Brian Froud and Ari Burke. It's a combination of picture book, fairy tale and rune dictionary. Brian Froud actually has a bunch of goblin books. It's obviously one of his favourite inspirations along with the fairies. This one, Goblins, co-authored with Ari Burke, is a hilarious field guide, presented as a reproduction of the Codex Goblinensis. The Goblin Companion is another field guide, this time annotated by the hilarious Terry Jones of Monty Python fame. And I have another volume in my film shelves about his illustrations for the Goblins of the Labyrinth. I even have a pop-up book about goblins that I'll show you in a minute. Good Fairies, Bad Fairies by Brian Froud is a collection of fanciful sketches that encompasses both the benevolent and the malevolent species of the fairy tribe. It's a tête bêche or a flip book with one side proclaiming good fairies, matched on the flip side for the title Bad Fairies. The illustrations are the heart of the book, done in black and white, sepia or full colour. This edition of The World of the Dark Crystal by Brian Froud is the original companion art book for the Dark Crystal film, which was released maybe 10 or 20 years ago, and it has long been out of print. However, a wonderful new edition of this book was released in early 2020, so it's luckily now available again if you're interested in a copy. This is the revised and expanded edition of Brian Froud's acclaimed Magnum Opus, The World of Faerie, featuring numerous wonderful paintings, watercolours and drawings of the fairy realm. It includes really interesting information about Froude's artistic process, from a peek inside his studio, to descriptions of the symbolism and the props used in some of his artwork, to a lovely essay by his wife on what it's like to live with him when he's creating. A fabulous book. It even comes with a poster of Neil Gaiman's instructions poem, which is essentially a list of survival tips for your next journey through the fairy tale world. Out of This World by Michael Page and illustrated by Robert Ingpen as well has a special place in my heart because it's one of the first expensive hardbacks I ever bought. I remember saving for months, going to the bookshop every week beside myself with worry that it would have been sold before I had enough money for it. It has 6 sections that cover the sweep of fantasy and imagination. The cosmos describes the world's mystic creatures, such as the zodiac, the goddess of love, Zeus. The ground and the underground deals with creatures who live in our homes, underground and in the forests. Wonderland guides us through such imaginary places as Atlantis, Treasure Island, King Solomon's Mines and Utopia. Magic, Science and Adventure covers alchemy, Frankenstein's monster and Pygmalion's ideal woman. Water, Sky and Air discusses mermaids, nymphs, argonauts, ghost ships, flying horses and sea serpents. And The Night introduces the shuddersome creatures that emerge at twilight. Ingpen's gorgeous illustrations pay homage to the work of Howard Pyle, Arthur Rackham and the ancient school of classical sculptors. Encyclopedia of Mysterious Places by Robert Ingpen and Philip Wilkinson is a guided tour of over 40 places around the world that for a variety of reasons have remained clouded in mystery. It includes forgotten cities, vast temples and enigmatic monuments that pique our curiosity and imagination. Right at the bottom of the pile we have Fairies and Demons by Edward Bracey. This is actually a Barnes & Noble reprint of a book I showed in my earlier video called Dragons, Little People, Witches, Fairies, Trolls and Elves. It celebrates fairy rituals according to the seasons and it's accompanied by classically gorgeous illustrations. At the time I purchased it I was fooled by the rename into thinking it was a new publication. But luckily it's delightful in either version, so if you're keen on finding a copy for yourself you can comfortably look for whichever one is cheapest. Finally, we've reached the last shelf. Giants by David Larkin is illustrated by Julia Keller, Carolyn Scrace and Juan Wingard. It discusses various giants of mythology and folklore and fiction. Gnomes by Portfleet and Hugen is a translation of a Dutch original that features illustrated observations of gnome habits, anatomy and lifestyle. It has a believable and detailed discussion of foods that are most loved by gnomes, how they raise their children, when they marry, where they live, what sort of pets they have, even how they tend to animals in the wild. They're magical characters and magnificent illustrations. There are actually a few volumes in the Gnome series. I also have the Secrets of Gnomes companion volume and a Gnome's Christmas, which I keep with my Christmas books. Here's one I mentioned earlier, Goblins by Brian Froud, the cute vintage pop-up book about a little girl who can't see the goblins hiding in the wood. I also have a companion Fairies volume with my pop-up books. The Flight of Dragons by Peter Dickinson is a somewhat serious attempt to prove that dragons did exist. Once again, it's another volume that I bought for the fantastic illustrations. The Book of Beasties by Belle Robertson is a fun illustrated bestiary of Scottish folklore. Ostensibly it was published as Volume 1, but no sequel seems to have ever been issued as far as I can tell. It's still cute as a standalone. Arthur Spiderwick's Field Guide to the Fantastical World Around You by Holly Black and Tony DiTerlizzi is a companion to the Spiderwick Chronicles, but it can really be enjoyed as a standalone book by anyone who loves magical creatures. This pretty series of myths, legends and lore collections is by various authors. Each book focuses on a different magical creature, with the fonts and monotone illustrations inside coloured to match the covers. It's a very cute series, but I'll cover each one in more detail in a separate video. Fairy expert Beatrice Philpotts follows the story of fairies and her Fairyland companion, from ancient mythology through Shakespeare and Victorian art to modern manifestations of fairy stories in Disney films and beyond. The text is accompanied by a wide selection of classic paintings and engravings. The Leprechauns Kingdom by Peter Haining is a collection of anecdotes and short tales of Irish magical creatures, charming black and white illustrations. It covers changelings, water shiri, and little cluricorns who hide in your cellar and drink your beer. And finally, at the end of this shelf, I have all my books in the wonderful Ology series. This is another collection that I'll have to cover separately to do it any justice, so I'll just go through one here briefly. Basically, the Ology's books are beautifully illustrated fictional encyclopedias on a number of different fantasy topics, supposedly written by various fictional experts, which are usually pen names for Dougal Steer. Each large format book contains many items of ephemera, from removable maps and postcards to letters that you can unfold, and other tactile items embedded in the page, such as fairy wings or dragon scales. There's lots of fun inside these books. If you've stuck around until the end of this video, I think I should issue with an honorary certificate of magical librarian studies, so please consider yourself so qualified. As always, if you're interested in any of the books in the video, or if you collect magical books as well and you want to share the love, please do chat in the comments. I'm always happy to talk beautiful books. Till next time, bye!